So once again, into the book of Romans, it occurs to me that the first few chapters are often read relatively quickly. That is, we go from 1 to 2 to 3 to get to the good parts. We don't often dwell in these first 3 chapters, and when we do, boy, does it make us uncomfortable. Because verse after paragraph after paragraph seems to be about how awful we are. In fact, I think the major sense of discomfort that comes to us, especially when we slow down and we drill in on these verses, this discomfort comes from this unending talk, this just over and over and over, this talk about the depravity of humankind. And it just doesn't stop. And we turn the page and now it's going to come good, and then it's just more, and it goes down and down and down. But when you recognize this in the context of the whole book, when you recognize what he's saying on these pages in the context of his entire message, what Paul's telling us is that our avoidance of God, that is the avoidance of the things of God, that in our depraved state, in our natural state that he's describing here, we will choose almost anything to avoid God. We will substitute like pro bass fishing and watching people play poker on TV in place of the things of God. And so, well, why is that? This is good news, but here's the thing. You see, when we put ourselves in the Spirit of God, when we put ourselves within reach of the Spirit of God, which for us is internal, we can't escape it. When we are confronted with these kinds of passages, these passages that remind us of our depravity, we come to discover how far we have to go in life. Every time we get to thinking we're okay, we have reached some kind of plateau of comfort in our Christianity. We go once more into passages like this and go, oh my goodness, there's me on those pages. Now, this is not just speaking to us. Of course, this is speaking to believers and unbelievers alike in these passages, because Paul includes all people. We avoid, humankind, all people, avoid God because they don't want to be confronted with what they know in their heart to be true. We know our fallenness. People know it. The conscience that God has embedded in all people reminds us constantly of what's right, what's wrong, and where we land. Hopefully over here. I think this was right over here, right? Whatever, hopefully we land over here. Sometimes we find ourselves here in the middle and over there on occasion. And so when these passages week after week after week confront us with this, it makes us uncomfortable. It makes us not want to open the book and hear this stuff. It makes us want to escape. We recognize that we come up short. We know that Paul is leading towards that very statement, that all fall short of the glory of God. All people fall short of the glory of God. And we're tempted sometimes to make ourselves comfortable, by the way. We're tempted to hear all as, all those people over there. But had Paul meant all those people over there, he would have said, all those people over there. But no, the truth is that all of us, saved, unsaved, Jews, Gentiles, all people fall short of the glory of God. And this is why humanity avoids God. Our escape mechanism doesn't like that discomfort, doesn't like being confronted by these things, especially week after week after week. And so we find other things to substitute for placing ourselves in the hearing of God's Word. But here's the truth. Here's the truth that all Christians would do well to remember. The Apostle Paul is not a Jesuit. You might have thought that because he seems very masochistic. He seems to be intentionally putting pain upon us, but he's not doing that. What Paul is doing is exactly the opposite of what it feels like. It feels like he's purposefully pounding us in the face over and over. Sinner, 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 sinner. But what he's doing is digging a hole. What he's doing is digging a pit as deep as he can possibly make it in 3 chapters. Deeper and deeper. And every time we stop and we sidestep and we look down in the hole, we say, whoa, it's not going to get any deeper than that for sure, right? That's what it means to say, I'm not that bad, right? But no, it's not going to get any worse than that. And then Paul makes it worser, right? He digs it a little deeper and he says, no, you're down there. And you say, whoa, wait a sec. I haven't killed anybody this week, right? So we're okay. We haven't killed, right? Nobody killed, okay, so nobody killed anybody this week, so it can't get any worser. And then it gets worser. And it's deeper and deeper, and he keeps digging this hole. And just fair warning, in case you want to leave now, he's going to dig it deeper this week. But he's doing this. Yes, I know that it's not worship. Okay, so my little friend over here said, hey, what's wrong with that guy up there? Even I know that, right? Okay. Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. I miss you so much. I like seeing you right there. All right, so where was I? Worser, right? That's where, okay, so I left it up. So Paul's digging this hole, this deep, deep, deep pit. He's doing it for a reason. Because when the light of grace shines down in that pit, and you're down there at the bottom of this like seemingly bottomless hole, right? You're down there, you see nothing but dark above you. Paul's saying, this is how good grace is going to seem. This is how good the light of Jesus is going to seem to you when it shines down in the bottom of that hole. Because when that first glimmer of light shines down, you're down there at the bottom of this pit. I was going to say at the bottom of this bottomless pit, but that wouldn't work either, and my friend would tell me I'm wrong. So you find yourself at the bottom of this really deep hole, okay? So, I mean, so deep you can't even see the light anymore. When that first light shines in you, what it's going to tell you? It's going to tell you that rescue is at hand, that hope is on the way. That's what Paul has been doing and what he's going to complete in today's passage. So we are in Romans chapter 3, and we are going to begin at verse 9 this morning. So Romans chapter 3, verse 9. Now remember, just a little synopsis, he has laid out Jew and Gentile over the last two and a quarter chapters. He said, look, the Gentiles already know that they're in trouble, and yet they're being saved. But Paul has been addressing his tribe. He's been addressing his clan, saying, you guys think you're okay. You think because you have the law that you're just golden with God. You're just fine. He says, but none of you keeps the law. He says, you think that circumcision that you have is all it's going to take. It's like your golden ticket into heaven. And Paul says, let me correct that assumption. He says, you cannot have an external faith. You cannot have this set of rules out here that you don't apply, but you tote them around and saying, look, we have the law. We have these rules. Now, Paul says, see, that's where you all went wrong over the past several centuries. You got to be cut to the heart. Remember that? You've got to be cut to the heart. You have to be circumcised in the heart. And so he's led up to that. You remember that kind of interim passage we had last week where he's going back and forth with this imaginary interlocutor, person asking him questions. They throw a question at him thinking they're going to trip him up, and he answers back and says, try again. And so they ask a harder question, and he says, well, that's a good question. Not good. And he answers it, and he try again, try again, try again. He says, really, you have no case. You have no case at all. And that's what leads up to this verse. Verse 9, chapter 3, what shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? That is the tribe of Judah there. Do we have any advantage? Not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under the power of sin. So that is his concluding point to all the back and forth. He says, okay, we've argued this long enough. No matter what you say, you're going to end up on the wrong side of this. So stop with the questions. Stop with the questions and accept the fact that all people are held in bondage to sin. You've got your Greek Bible out there. It's Pontus, Hupo, Hamartia. And we tend to read this as all people are sinners. True statement. We can tend to read this as all people are susceptible to sin. Again, true statement. But what this really says, hupo, hamartia, okay? Under the dominion of sin. That is, here's the happy part, your life is ruled by sin. You are incapable of removing yourself from that. What rules your life because of the fallen state of humankind is sin. Now, I know what you're thinking. I haven't murdered anybody. He says that's not the measure of it, is it? God doesn't measure your goodness or your badness by whether or not you have committed murder. He measures your goodness or your badness by how closely you adhere to the prime commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So he says, don't be fooled. None of you should be fooled. None of you should be lax. None of you should assume anything, because all people, Pontus, all people are hupo hamartia. You are all under the power of sin. You see where he's building up to now. Because now what's the question in your mind is, how do I get out of this? How do I get out from underneath that? And it'd be great, it'd be awesome if Paul would have just skipped from there over to, I don't know, verse 21. But he's not going to, because he's digging the hole deeper. He says, if you don't believe me, if you don't believe that you're under the power of sin, you think you've got it under control in some way, you think you're big and strong and you can wrestle sin away. He says, riddle me this, right? He says in verse 10, there is no one righteous, not even one. Now, as a Gentile, we would hear that and go, well, he must be talking about us. Except he's drawn that from Ecclesiastes chapter 7. So, tribe of Judah, tribe of Benjamin, Gentiles, all of you. There is not a righteous person among you. Now, somebody's going to be tempted to pop their head up, right? And they're going to say, well, you know, I'm not that bad. And Paul's going to say, go back to verse 9. All. There is none righteous. All are under the dominion of sin. And then he's going to lay this out in this tripart example of what sin does to us. So if any of us right now are going, well, I'm not that bad. Certainly, Pastor's not talking about me, and of course not you. But if we're ever tempted to read something like this and go, this isn't me, I'm okay. Listen to what he says. First, he speaks about our character, starting in verse 11. Okay? There's no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. Psalm 14. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Now that makes your head spin a little bit. Or maybe just me, because I'm up here breathing hard. Okay? But you say, wait a minute. Come on. I do some good. Right, Kenneth? Ken does some good. I've seen him do it. So how can the Bible say that there's none of us that does good? Well, the trouble we have is we're delusional. First of all, we think we're seeking after God. All people think they're seeking after God. Ask anybody out there on the street where they're headed when they die. Heaven. These rolling hills. Looks a lot like California.
Oh, please.
All right, I'm sorry. Looks a lot like Idaho. How about that? Okay. So there's this delusion that everybody is good enough. If they haven't done that one thing, everybody's good enough to go to heaven. And Paul says, well, no. Refer to Psalm 14. That'll tell you that you're not seeking after God, even if you think that you are. He says, all have turned away. There's no one who does good. And here's where my brother Kenneth went wrong. He's evaluating goodness on his scale. And oh my goodness, I didn't intend for this to be a comedy show today. Goodness. Okay, so I got to pick on Rick. So Rick says, I'm evaluating good on my scale, but Rick plays a short scale, right? His goodness is between this and this. Wow, that's true.
But it does say.
I better stop before I get in trouble. Okay, so the end. No, so our goodness is evaluated between here and here. That's our idea, my idea, Ken's idea, Rick's idea of goodness is between here and here. But what's God's idea of good? God's idea of good is from 0 to infinity. We pick out this small section over here and we say, well, I didn't do this, so I'm cool. Right? Remember that passage in Isaiah, I think 64? All your good works are like filthy rags. There's your reference right there. God says your good works honored you. Your good works glorified you. Your good works pleased you. Your good works blah, 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 blah. He said, but none of your hearts were turned towards me. So Paul's taken his shovel out and he's dug that hole a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. We're starting to feel a little claustrophobic because we are way down in that hole. He says, that's your character. He says, but look what your character does to your conduct. Starting in verse 13, their throats, that is your throats, their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Now, Paul's just selected one part of our conduct, but he does that because that's the part that tends to hurt people the most. We rarely hurt people physically, but boy, the stuff that shoots out of our face sometimes, whether we think about it or don't think about it, it cuts deep, doesn't it? Right? The words cut deep. He says, okay, you're such a good person. Tell me the last 10 things you said. And by the way, I'm sorry. Not just the things that shoot out of your face. The things you think about saying up in your head up here. The things that you wish you could say, I won't pound it, but down here in your heart, right? He says, yeah, you're really good people. Get yourself a shovel and help me dig this hole. He says you kill each other with your mouth. You kill each other with the words that come out of your face. You kill each other with the thoughts that you think. You're smiling at your brother and you're thinking, I'm not, but you're thinking something terrible at the same time. You're laughing at... So you have this thing. Now, 5 minutes ago, we all said, no, well, not me. I'm not under the dominion of sin, right? I'm not under the control of sin. And yet, the deeper he digs this hole, the more we realize how not good we are. So our character is tainted. Because our character is tainted, our conduct is wicked. And because our conduct is wicked, under the dominion of sin, all of our choices follow after that. Listen to this, starting in verse 15. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So I'm going to let y'all off the hook. I'm going to talk about people outside the building. How about that? That make you feel better? So, whew, your stock just rose there. We think about all the things that we argue about in the culture today, right? This, that. One of the big things missing in our discourse, one of the big things missing because the church doesn't have a bigger place in the culture, is that there's no fear of God. None whatsoever. And because there's no fear of God, everything else, pyramids on top of that. That's the foundation. That's why the dominion of sin is so big and broad and heavy. That's why we can't get out from underneath it. That's why it is inescapable for us. Because the foundation of wisdom, the foundation of life, the foundation that God established in the garden, right? God said, all this is yours. Till it, procreate, fill it with life. Take care of this for me. And God gave the original couple all the tools they needed. He gave them absolutely every single thing they needed. All this is yours. Except that. Except that. Trust me that I'm going to guard this tree of life over here. You don't need to know this. You don't need to know good and evil. Trust me. Look at what I gave you. Look at this world I made for you. Look at the beautiful wife I got you. Got you? Made you? Whatever. Look at what I've done for you. Trust me that this is all you need. Trust me that this is sufficient. Trust me that this is good. And you don't need to know what that tree does. You don't need that knowledge. Trust me, trust me, trust me. In essence, fear me. Fear me. Because what does God say? If you touch this, if you eat from this tree, you will die. Now, all of us are saying, I wouldn't have touched it, right? Show of hands. None of us would have. Of course we would have. We would have scampered over there like bunnies. But you see that as the basis for everything. We shouldn't be surprised that the culture has no fear of God, because that was the big problem from the beginning. There's no fear of God before their eyes. And when that's gone, when that disappears, when that affects this large swath of humankind that you and I live with, look at the results. Look at the divisiveness. Look at the violence. Look at the murder. Look at the heartache. I mean, look, just every word you want to put in there, look at that and trace it all back to this. Every bit of it comes back to this. And listen, take your little finger and trace that back. That doesn't go back to God. You trace this passage back. You trace this hole that you're in. It doesn't go back to God. It goes back to us. It goes back to humankind. It says your character's tainted because of sin. Your conduct is tainted because of sin. The choices that you make are tainted because of sin. And what's your biggest sin? You have no fear of God. So, there you are, at the bottom of that pit. There's no way to get out, no way to clamber out. Can't even see the light anymore. That hole's so deep. There you are. You're wondering how you got there. Now you know. You're wondering what keeps you there. Now you know. Right? He's taken 3 chapters to get us to this point. That's where you're at. And he says this in verse 19. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. In other words, you have the law, but it is not a golden ticket. The law was given so that you would know what sin is, so that you would know exactly how bad you are. And it can't save you. Therefore, none will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of sin. The other thing that we become aware of through the law, we look at that and say, well, 10 commandments, I can do that. I mean, if it was 12, it'd be iffy, but 10 I can do. And then you test yourself, huh? You test yourself. Maybe this week you didn't look at your neighbor's donkey, but you were eyeballing something else. Okay, I'll do better on that next week. Oh wait, I didn't murder anyone this week. And yet, up here in your being, you said something to that person who, cut you off in traffic or something. Not you, Caleb, but other people. And we come to find out that this law, which seems so clear, so easy to attain to, is impossible for us. And we say, why? Why is this so hard? Why can't I drive 7.5 miles from this building to Burley without getting wound up about somebody beside me? Not me. This is an imaginary person. Why can't I do that? Oh, because my soul is under the dominion of sin. Do you remember how he started all this? How this whole long tirade began? You go back to chapter 1 and verse 17 and 18. This is right after this, all this began. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. That was the last good thing he said before he launched into this weeks-long tirade against sin. And the whole purpose of this is for us to reach the end of this and realize you're right. You're right. My every thought is tainted. The things that I think are good in my heart are self-centered. The choices I make commit violence to this person. They draw attention to myself in that case, whatever. All of it. I understand now why I'm at the bottom of this hole. And he does all this. And you're going to have to wait until next week to turn the corner. Because now you're at the bottom of this hole. And a little bit of light is starting to shine down that shaft. It's a little pin of light is coming down there. And you're saying, I need help. I need to be saved from this predicament. And I know I can't climb out of here. I can't see the top, so there's no way I'm going to shimmy up this hole. It is impossible. So the whole reason he's been giving all of this is for us to recall that salvation, that gospel message that he introduced in 17 and 18 of chapter 1. And we're saying the law can't save us. My good personage can't save us. I am essentially irredeemable. I need salvation. And so, yeah, it's been a difficult several weeks as we have slogged through Paul seeming to call us names week after week. But the reason that he does this is so that we will see how sweet the light of salvation is. Now, when we talk about that hole, when we look at that, it's hard for us to picture it because so many of us have spent years and decades away from that hole. We've dipped our foot in it for sure, but we haven't found ourselves at the bottom of that hole. We've forgotten what it's like. We've forgotten what it feels like to be helpless. To be at the bottom of that hole and see nothing above us, have no hope, until that moment in your life where that light came, that shaft of light touched you. And you sense the grace of God. You and I can slip. We can dip our foot in that hole, but we can't go back to where we were before God got a hold of us. But there's a danger in that, and that is our self-perception can be we can see ourselves as kind of good, kind of okay, kind of all right. So it's good for us to go into passages like this, to be confronted by this stuff, to be reminded of how far we've come, how far our reading and our prayer, how far we've come from lost to found. We forget how far that was, where we were and where we are now. It becomes easy for us to take it for granted. To just go, awesome, okay, I'm good now. And when we do that, when we take it for granted, we say, all right, I'm all right now, so I don't have anything to worry about. It colors our commitment. It lessens our commitment. It lowers it. But when we go back and we hear week after week how deep that hole was, when we reflect, when we just take even a minute and think about how dangerous our predicament was, what an helpless place we were in, how every action in our life, everything we did, said, thought, everything was influenced and governed and motivated by our sin nature. When we remind ourselves of that, we see how incredible the grace of God is. That he brought you and me and all of us from way over there to here. And he will carry us all the way home. We see that the embodied Holy Spirit in us, the influence of Christ on us, the effect of God all around us. We see how amazing that is. We see what John says in chapter 1 of his gospel about grace upon grace upon grace upon grace, that no matter what, once we have been plucked from that hole, our lives are radically changed. It's tempting to excuse ourselves from that and say, well, that was the old me. None of that stuff is me anymore. Except it is. We realize we're saved. We realize we are secure in Christ. But our character and our person and our actions and our choices are still being transformed. This is a lifelong experience. There is no completion date, by the way. I don't know if you were looking for that, like the date when you'd be done. You get your report card and you could summer. It doesn't. I'm sorry to tell you, if you're just hearing this for the first time, this is all the way until the day that you are called home. You are going to be transformed and renewed. So we don't wallow in that hole anymore. We're not stuck in that miry mess anymore. But it's good to be reminded of that so we can see how far we've come and in some cases how far we have to go. I'll use his example just real briefly. Think about your tongue. It's kind of gross. You think about your tongue. You think about the words that you say, the things that come out of your mouth. And yet we may not intentionally say mean things. We may not be intentional in trying to hurt somebody. But the things that slip out of our mouth, and worse yet, the things that rest in our hearts, that we think about saying, that we rehearse saying, the things that we say, oh, I'm just being sarcastic, all those kinds of things are evidence of how far we have to go. There's a reason that James says this tiny little organ is the most dangerous. That James says this little organ starts enormous fires. This little thing in your mouth starts so much trouble. So yeah, we're not at the bottom of the hole anymore. But remember, that hole still exists. And you could be walking by and find your foot slipping on the edge there so easily. But the answer to that is grace. The answer to that is the influence of the Spirit in your life. The answer to that is to be transformed as we live our lives. We consider those kinds of things. We consider the violence that comes out of our speech. We consider the violence in our action, the violence in the choices. And listen, it's not just things that we do to people outside the walls. We do this to one another. You think about all those things, and you become more thankful for the grace that came into your life. That not only pulled you out of the hole, but keeps you away from the edges as well. So as I began this morning, I'll tell you once more. Paul didn't write these 3 chapters to make you upset. He didn't write these to attack anybody. He wrote these 3 chapters to show how great a salvation that Christ offers. He wrote these 3 chapters to make grace the greatest thing that had ever been offered. Things haven't changed from the ancient world to today, so we can't go, well, that was then. It's probably even worse now. That hole is even deeper. And listen, people are in denial about their spiritual state. I mean, that's a reality. People are in denial about their spiritual state, convinced that as long as they don't murder anybody, that they're golden. But Christian, you know the truth. You know that only by being born again can the influence of sin be lessened on your life, can be pulled away from you. Only by being born again can the stain of sin be washed clean. Only through the blood of Jesus can we be redeemed in the grace of God. And listen, that's just the beginning. Paul's turning a corner now, and I promise it won't be so sad anymore. He's turning the corner because that's just the beginning. Seeing that light, right? Seeing that light that came into your life at just the right moment. Seeing that light started you on this lifelong journey that you will complete the day that you're called home. But this lifelong journey, this experiencing of grace upon grace upon grace of God's blessings that are just everywhere in your life. And this transformative power, the experience of these blessings, the experience of your growth in life, of your transformation, that moves you further and further and further from that sin nature. It makes you more and more Christ-like. Makes you less the way that you were born and more the way that God intends for you to be. And my friends, that is an incredible blessing. Amen? Amen. Let's rise together.